The day I buried my husband, I thought the worst thing I would face was the silence he left behind. I stood beside Michael Brooks' coffin, my hand resting on the cold wood, trying to hold myself together as people whispered their condolences. 35 years of marriage, gone in a single breath. Then a woman I had never seen before sat down beside me. She didn't look at the coffin. She looked at me. Leaning closer, she whispered, "He sent me." My heart stopped. Michael was dead. I had watched him take his last breath. So how could he send anyone? Before I could ask a single question, she slipped a sealed envelope into my hands and walked away like she had just changed my life forever. If this moment pulled you in, stay with me, because what I discovered next shattered everything I believed about love, truth, and the man I thought I knew. What would you have done in my place? I used to believe my life was simple in the best possible way. Not perfect, no marriage ever is, but steady, predictable, safe. For 35 years, Michael Brooks was the center of that life. He wasn't the kind of man who drew attention when he walked into a room. He didn't need to. He had this quiet presence, the kind that made people trust him without question. He spoke carefully, listened more than he talked, and always seemed to know exactly what needed to be done even before anyone asked. That was the man I married. That was the man I thought I knew. We met when I was 26, working as a receptionist at a small accounting firm in Hartford. Michael had come in as a client, soft-spoken, polite, with a worn leather briefcase, and a habit of apologizing for things that weren't his fault. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't charming in the way movies teach you to expect, but he was kind, and kindness back then felt like everything. Our first date was at a modest Italian restaurant. He showed up early, stood when I arrived, and looked at me like I was the only person in the room. Not in an intense, overwhelming way, but in a quiet, grounded way, like he was already certain about something I hadn't even begun to consider. 6 months later, he proposed. A year after that, we were married in a small church just outside town. No grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, just vows, steady hands, and a promise to build something that would last. And we did. Or at least, I thought we did. We built a life in a quiet suburb in Connecticut, a 2-story house with white siding, a maple tree in the front yard, and a kitchen that always smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon. Michael worked in financial consulting, eventually building a respectable client base. I left my job after a few years and focused on our home, our routines, our life together. We didn't have children. That had been one of the few disappointments we shared. Years of trying doctor visits, quiet heartbreaks we never fully spoke about, but somehow we made peace with it, or maybe we just learned how to live around it. Michael never blamed me, not once. If anything, he became more attentive, more present. He made sure our life felt full in other ways: weekend trips, holiday traditions, small surprises that reminded me I was still loved. Every Christmas, he insisted on putting up the lights himself, even as he got older and climbing the ladder became harder. Every Thanksgiving, he would carve the turkey with that same careful precision, like it was a ritual he refused to let go of. He remembered things. The way I liked my coffee, half a teaspoon of sugar, just enough cream to soften the bitterness. The exact brand of candles I bought every fall. The song that made me cry the first time we danced to it. He paid attention. That's what made everything so much harder to understand now, because men who pay attention don't live double lives, do they? Looking back, though, there were moments. Small ones, the kind you dismiss because they don't fit the story you believe in. Michael traveled often for work, at least that's what I told myself. Financial consulting required it, didn't it? Clients in different cities, meetings that ran late, occasional overnight stays. I never questioned it. Why would I? He always came home. He always kissed me the same way, gentle, familiar, reassuring. He never smelled like anything unfamiliar, never acted distant in a way that felt obvious. If anything, he seemed tired, like the world had taken something out of him that he couldn't quite explain. Sometimes, late at night, I would wake up and find him sitting at the edge of the bed, staring into the dark. "Michael," I'd whisper. He would turn almost startled and force a small smile. Just couldn't sleep. Work, yeah, just work. And I would accept that, because that's what you do when you trust someone. You don't dig into the shadows. You let them exist. There were other things, too. Phone calls he took in the other room, emails he closed a little too quickly when I walked by, a second credit card statement that once arrived by mistake one, he brushed off as a business account I didn't need to worry about. Each time there was an explanation, and each time I believed him. Not because I was naive, but because I chose to be. Because the alternative, the idea that the man I had built my entire life around might not be who I thought he was, felt too big to face. So I stayed inside the version of reality that made sense, until the day it didn't anymore. The last year of Michael's life was different. Subtly at first. He seemed more reflective, quieter in a way that felt deeper than before. He started organizing things, documents, files, even the garage, which he had ignored for years. He labeled boxes, sorted through old papers, and spent hours in his home office with the door closed. I assumed it was age. We were both getting older, slowing down, thinking about the future in a more practical way. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite name. He began to look at me differently, not with less love, but with something heavier behind it. Regret, maybe, or guilt. I remember catching him watching me once while I was making dinner, just standing in the doorway, silent. What I asked, smiling. He hesitated. Just for a second too long. Nothing he said, just thinking how lucky I am. It should have made me feel warm. Instead, for reasons I didn't understand at the time, it made my chest tighten, as if he was saying goodbye without telling me. The night before he went into the hospital, he held my hand longer than usual. We were sitting on the couch, the television playing something neither of us was really watching. His grip tightened slightly, and when I looked at him, his eyes were fixed on mine in a way that felt final. "Jean," he said quietly. "Yeah, if anything ever happens—" I laughed softly, cutting him off. "Don't start, you're going to be fine." He didn't laugh. He just nodded slowly, like he had expected that response. "Yeah," he said. "Of course." That was the last real conversation we had. 2 days later, he was gone. A sudden complication. Something the doctors said they couldn't have predicted. And just like that, the man I had built my entire life around became a memory. Or so I thought. Because now sitting in that funeral home with a sealed envelope in my hands and a stranger's words echoing in my ears, he sent me. I realized something I wasn't ready to accept. Maybe Michael Brooks hadn't left everything behind. Maybe he had been hiding something all along. And maybe this was only the beginning. I didn't open the envelope right away. I wish I could say it was because I was being careful, thoughtful, that I wanted the right moment, the right setting, some kind of emotional preparation for whatever Michael had left behind. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of what I might find inside. Afraid that whatever was written there would confirm the quiet, creeping feeling already taking hold in my chest. That the life I thought I had lived for 35 years wasn't as whole as I believed. So instead I carried it, from the funeral home to the car, all the way back to the house that suddenly felt too large and too quiet at the same time. The moment I stepped inside, the silence hit me like a wall. It wasn't just the absence of Michael's voice, it was everything. The clock ticking too loudly in the hallway, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the way the air seemed still as if the house itself was holding its breath. This had always been our home. Now it felt like a place I didn't fully recognize. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter, the envelope still clutched in my hand. For a long moment, I just stood there staring at it. My name was written on the front in Michael's handwriting. Jean. No last name, no formality, just Jean. The way he had always written it in little notes he left me over the years. My chest tightened. Whatever was inside, it was meant for me, not for anyone else, not for lawyers or relatives or formal readings, for me, alone. I walked slowly into the living room and sat down on the couch, the same couch where we had spent countless evenings together watching television, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. My hands were shaking. "Just open it," I whispered to myself. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, my mind went back to her. The woman at the funeral, Claire Bennett. I hadn't even realized I knew her name until it slipped into my thoughts as if it had been placed there without my permission. Had she told me? Or had I seen it somewhere on the envelope? Maybe no. There had been nothing written except my name, which meant she must have told me. And somehow, in the chaos of that moment, it had stayed. That alone was unsettling, because I couldn't remember the exact moment she said it. I couldn't remember how the conversation had unfolded in detail. All I could remember was the way she looked at me, calm, steady almost. Practiced, like she had done this before, like she had rehearsed it. A chill ran down my spine. I pushed myself up from the couch and walked back into the kitchen, suddenly needing to move, to think, to do something other than sit there with my thoughts unraveling. I poured myself a glass of water, my hand still trembling slightly as I lifted it to my lips. He sent me. The words echoed again. Michael had sent her. But when before he died, had he known something I didn't? Of course he had known. That much was obvious now. Whatever had taken him from me so suddenly, maybe it hadn't been as sudden for him. Maybe he had been preparing, planning. The thought made my stomach turn. What kind of man plans for something like this and doesn't tell his wife unless he couldn't? Unless what he needed to say couldn't be said out loud. I set the glass down too quickly, the sound sharp against the quiet of the room. "No," I murmured. "No, that doesn't make sense." But nothing made sense anymore. I walked back to the living room, the envelope still in my hand. This time I didn't sit down. I just stood there, staring at it like it might open itself if I looked at it long enough. Finally, with a deep breath I didn't realize I had been holding, I slid my finger under the seal and tore it open. The sound was louder than it should have been. Inside, there was a single folded sheet of paper, and something else. A smaller slip, thicker like cardstock. I pulled the letter out first. The paper felt familiar, not just in texture, but in weight. Michael had always preferred a certain kind of stationery, simple off-white, slightly heavier than standard paper. He said it felt more intentional. I unfolded it slowly. The first line hit me before I was ready. "Jun, if you're reading this, then I'm already gone." My vision blurred instantly. I blinked hard, forcing myself to focus. I had imagined this moment reading something Michael left behind, but never like this. Never with this knot of dread tightening in my chest. I kept reading. "I'm sorry." The words were written clearly without hesitation. Not scribbled, not rushed, deliberate. "I'm sorry for the pain I know this will cause you. I'm sorry for the confusion. And most of all, I'm sorry for the truth you're about to discover." My breath caught. Truth. There it was again. The same word Claire had used. "He wanted you to know the truth, but not here." My hands gripped the paper tighter. For years I told myself I was protecting you, that I was doing what I had to do. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from losing you, from facing what I had done. A cold wave washed over me, what he had done. I could feel it now, that quiet creeping certainty turning into something sharper, something undeniable. Michael had been hiding something big enough to write a letter like this. Big enough to bring a stranger into my life on the day of his funeral. I forced myself to keep reading. "There are things you don't know about me, about the life I lived outside of the one we shared. I never meant for it to go this far. I never meant to hurt you, but intentions don't change the truth." My knees felt weak. I lowered myself slowly onto the arm of the couch, afraid I might collapse completely if I didn't. Outside of the one we shared. The words echoed in my mind, each one landing heavier than the last. A life outside of our life. No, that couldn't be what it sounded like. It couldn't. But deep down, I already knew. The letter continued. "By the time you read this, Claire will have found you. You can trust her. She knows everything and she will help guide you through what comes next. My eyes flicked to the empty space beside me as if I expected Claire to appear again. Help guide you through what comes next. My heart pounded harder. This wasn't just a confession. It was a beginning. Whatever Michael had hidden, it wasn't something I could simply read about and move on from. It was something I was going to have to face. I swallowed hard and looked down at the final lines of the letter. There's an address included. I need you to go there. Not for me, but for yourself. Because the truth is waiting for you there, Jean, and you deserve to see it with your own eyes. I'm sorry I didn't have the courage to tell you while I was alive. I loved you. I still do. Michael. The room felt like it was spinning. I lowered the letter into my lap, my hands numb now instead of shaking. An address. My eyes drifted to the smaller piece of cardstock I hadn't looked at yet. Slowly, almost reluctantly, I picked it up. It was exactly what I feared. An address printed neatly in black ink. A place I had never been. A place that somehow was connected to my husband's hidden life. My chest rose and fell unevenly. For 35 years, I thought I knew everything about Michael Brooks. And in the span of a single afternoon, that certainty had been shattered. I stared at the address again, my mind racing with possibilities I wasn't ready to face. Whatever was waiting for me there, it was going to change everything. And for the first time since the funeral, I understood what Claire meant. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about truth, and I had no idea if I was strong enough to handle it. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I tried. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hollow silence that used to be filled with Michael's steady breathing. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw his handwriting. That letter. Those words. There are things you don't know about me. It played over and over again in my mind, like a song I couldn't turn off. Sometime around 3 a.m, I gave up pretending I could rest. I got out of bed, wrapped a cardigan around myself, and walked back into the living room. The letter was still on the coffee table where I had left it, the address card beside it. Waiting. I stood there for a long time, arms crossed tightly over my chest as if I could hold myself together by sheer force. The house felt colder than usual, or maybe it was just me. Not for me, but for yourself. Michael's words echoed again. I hated that he could still affect me like this, that even now, after everything he was guiding me, pulling me towards something I didn't understand. I walked over and picked up the address card. The paper was firm between my fingers. Real. Unavoidable. A place I had never been. A place that somehow held the truth about my husband's hidden life. My instinct was to ignore it, to put it back down, tear it up, throw it away, anything to avoid stepping into whatever waited for me there. I could stay here in this house, in this version of my life, where things were still manageable. Where Michael was gone, yes, but at least the man I loved remained intact in my memory, untouched, unquestioned, but that version was already cracking. Because now I knew, or at least I knew enough to understand that I didn't know everything, and that uncertainty was worse than the truth could ever be. I let out a slow breath and closed my eyes. "What did you do, Michael?" I whispered. There was no answer. Of course there wasn't. Only that silence again, thick and unforgiving. When I opened my eyes, my gaze drifted to the front door. For a moment, I just stared at it. Then, without letting myself think any further, I grabbed my keys. The morning air was cool and sharp against my skin as I stepped outside. The sky was still dim, the sun only beginning to rise, casting a faint gray light over the quiet street. Everything looked normal, peaceful, as if nothing had changed. I locked the door behind me, the click echoing louder than it should have. Then I got into my car. The address sat on the passenger seat beside me. I glanced at it once more before starting the engine. "This is a mistake," I muttered under my breath. But I didn't stop. The drive took about 40 minutes. 40 minutes of silence broken only by the occasional sound of passing cars and the soft hum of the engine. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want distractions. I needed to feel this, every second of it. The closer I got, the tighter my chest became. The neighborhood wasn't what I expected. For some reason, I had imagined something hidden, isolated, maybe even run down. But this wasn't that. It was a quiet suburban street, neat lawns, modest houses, the kind of place where neighbors waved to each other and kids rode bikes in the afternoon. Normal, painfully normal. I slowed the car as I approached the address. A small single-story house with pale blue siding came into view. Nothing remarkable about it. No sign that it held anything that could shatter my entire life. I parked across the street. For a moment, I just sat there staring at it. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. "This is it," I whispered. "The final line I couldn't uncross. Once I stepped out of this car, there would be no going back, no pretending, no protecting the version of Michael I had held onto for decades." I swallowed hard. Then I opened the door. Each step toward the house felt heavier than the last. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I walked up the short driveway. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure anyone inside could hear it. I reached the front door, raised my hand, hesitated for just a second. Then I knocked. The sound echoed in the quiet morning. Once, twice, 3 times. I almost turned around, almost told myself this had been a mistake, but then footsteps, light, quick, coming closer. My breath caught. The door opened, and everything inside me stopped. A boy stood there. He couldn't have been older than 8. Dark hair, wide eyes, a small frame that looked even smaller in the oversized t-shirt he was wearing. He looked up at me, curious but not afraid. "Yes," he asked. My voice wouldn't come out at first. I just stared at him. There was something about his face, something painfully familiar. It hit me slowly like a wave I couldn't escape. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the way his brow furrowed slightly as he waited for me to speak. I had seen that expression before, thousands of times, on Michael. My throat tightened. I'm sorry, I managed my voice barely steady. Is your mom home?" He hesitated for a second, then nodded. "Mom," he called over his shoulder, "someone's here." I felt my pulse spike. This was it. This was really happening. A few seconds later, a woman appeared behind him. She was in her mid-30s, maybe a little older. Her hair was pulled back loosely, and she wore a simple sweater and jeans. There was nothing extraordinary about her appearance except for the way she froze the moment she saw me. Her eyes widened. Confusion. Then recognition of something she couldn't quite place. "Yes," she said carefully. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to stand still, to breathe, to speak. "My name is Jean Brooks." The words hung in the air between us. I saw the shift immediately. The moment everything changed. Her face went pale. Her hand instinctively moved to rest on the boy's shoulder. I continued, my voice trembling despite my effort to control it. "I think we need to talk about Michael." The silence that followed was suffocating. The boy looked up at her, then back at me. And then he said the words that shattered whatever fragile hope I still had left. "Michael," he repeated. "You mean my dad?" My world tilted. I felt it physically, like the ground beneath me had shifted. I gripped the edge of the door frame to steady myself. The woman closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if bracing for something she had always feared but never expected to face. When she opened them again, there was no confusion left, only truth, raw, unavoidable. "Come inside," she said quietly. And just like that, everything I thought I knew about my husband, about my life, began to fall apart. I stepped inside the house like someone entering a life that wasn't mine, but somehow had always existed alongside it. The air smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something sweet, maybe pancakes from earlier that morning. It was warm, lived in, comfortable in a way that made my chest ache, because it felt real, not like a secret, not like something hidden in the shadows. "Ethan, go to your room for a minute, okay?" the woman said gently. The boy Ethan hesitated. His eyes flicked between us, sensing the tension without understanding it. "But please," she added softly. He nodded, though reluctantly, and disappeared down the hallway, glancing back one last time before closing his door. The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had felt all morning. The woman turned back to me. Up close, I could see the strain in her face, the tightness around her eyes, the way her shoulders were slightly rigid, like she was bracing for impact. "I'm Rachel," she said quietly. I nodded, though my mind was still struggling to catch up. "Jean," I replied, even though I had already said it. We stood there facing each other like strangers who had somehow ended up in the same story, a story neither of us had chosen. "Would you like to sit down?" she asked after a moment. I almost laughed at the normalcy of the question. Sit down, as if this were a casual visit, as if my entire life hadn't just been split open at her front door. But my legs felt weak, so I nodded. She led me into the living room. It was small but neat. A gray couch, a coffee table with a few scattered toys, a bookshelf lined with children's books and framed photos. Photos! My eyes were drawn to them immediately. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't stop myself. There he was, Michael, smiling, standing beside Rachel, holding Ethan in his arms. Different moments, different places, but always the same quiet smile I knew so well. Only now, it wasn't mine alone. My stomach twisted violently. I lowered myself onto the couch, my hands clasped tightly together to keep them from shaking. Rachel sat across from me, leaving a careful distance between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, I forced the words out. "How long?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, hollow. Rachel didn't pretend not to understand. She looked down at her hands before answering. 8 years, she said. 8. The number echoed in my mind like a bell. 8 years. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a moment of weakness. That was a life. A whole other life. I felt something inside me crack and... "Ethan," I asked, though I already knew. She glanced toward the hallway where his door was closed. "He's 7, she said softly. "He just turned 7 last month." 7. My breath caught. The math was cruelly simple. Michael had been living this life, this other life, for almost as long as Ethan had been alive, and I had never known, not once. "Did you know?" I asked, suddenly my eyes snapping back to hers. Rachel looked up, startled. "Know what about me?" I said the words sharper now, about his wife. The silence that followed told me everything before she even spoke. "No," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't." I studied her face, searching for any sign of deception, anything that would justify the anger rising in my chest, but all I saw was confusion, and something else. Fear. "I thought," she continued, swallowing hard. "I thought he was divorced. He told me his marriage ended years ago." A bitter laugh escaped me before I could stop it. "Of course he did," I muttered. It was almost absurd. The simplicity of the lie, the ease with which he had carried it. I looked away, my gaze falling back on the photos. Michael at Ethan's birthday party. Michael sitting at this very coffee table helping with homework. Michael living a life I had never even imagined. What was he like? Here I asked quietly. Rachel hesitated. "Why does that matter?" "Because I need to know," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "I need to understand how one person can be two completely different men." She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. "He was..." She paused, searching for the right words. "He was kind, gentle, always present when he was here." The words hit me harder than I expected, because they were the same words I would have used. "He loved Ethan," she added, her voice softening. "More than anything." I closed my eyes for a brief second. Of course he did. Michael had always been that kind of man. Or at least, I thought he was. "And you?" I asked, opening my eyes again. Rachel looked away this time. "I loved him," she admitted quietly. "I thought we were building a future together." The honesty in her voice made it impossible to hate her, as much as I wanted to, as much as it would have been easier. "You didn't question it," I pressed. "The time he was gone." "The gaps I did," she said, "sometimes. But he always had an explanation. Work, travel, Family obligations he didn't want to talk about. My chest tightened. Family obligations. That was me. I let out a slow, shaky breath. We were both living in the same lie, I said. Rachel nodded, her eyes glistening now. Yes, she whispered. For a moment the anger between us dissolved, replaced by something heavier, shared, unspoken. Grief not just for the man we lost, but for the truth we never had. From down the hallway I heard a door creak open. Ethan stepped out, peeking around the corner. "Mom," he called softly. Rachel turned immediately. "It's okay, honey," she said. "You can come here." He walked toward us slowly, his small frame hesitant but curious. His eyes landed on me again. "You're still here," he said. There was no accusation in his voice, just observation. I forced a small smile, though it felt fragile. "Yeah," I said gently, "I guess I am." He looked at me for a moment, then asked the question I wasn't ready for. "Did you know my dad?" The room seemed to shrink around me. Rachel inhaled sharply, clearly unprepared for that. I swallowed my throat tight. Did I know him? The question felt almost impossible to answer. I began, then stopped, because the truth was, I didn't know anymore. "Not really, I thought I did," I said finally, my voice soft but steady. Ethan tilted his head slightly as if trying to understand. "My dad was a good person," he said simply. The innocence in his voice cut deeper than anything else. I felt tears sting my eyes, but I blinked them back. "I'm sure he was," I replied, and in that moment I realized something I hadn't expected. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It wasn't just about lies. It was about a child who had lost his father. A child who saw the man I loved in a way that was still pure, untouched by everything I had just discovered. And somehow, that made everything even more complicated. I looked at Rachel, then back at Ethan. And for the first time since I had arrived, the question shifted. Not just what had Michael done, but what was I going to do now I stayed longer than I expected. At first I told myself it was because I needed answers, that I couldn't leave without understanding more, without piecing together how Michael had managed to live two lives so seamlessly for so many years. But the truth was, I didn't know how to walk away. Not from Rachel, and not from Ethan. Rachel made coffee. It felt almost surreal sitting in her living room watching her move around the kitchen as if this were an ordinary morning. The clink of mugs, the quiet hum of the coffee maker, the soft shuffle of her footsteps, it all created a strange sense of normalcy that clashed violently with the storm inside me. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug when she handed it to me. "Thank you," I said, my voice distant. She nodded, then sat across from me again. Ethan had settled on the floor nearby, quietly building something with a set of blocks. Every now and then he would glance up at us as if trying to understand the invisible tension hanging in the air. I watched him for a moment. There was no denying it now. The resemblance wasn't just physical, it was in the way he focused, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he concentrated, the way he absent-mindedly tapped his fingers against the floor. Michael. Everywhere I looked. Michael. "How did you meet him?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. Rachel exhaled slowly as if she had been expecting the question. "It was about 9 years ago," she began. "I was working at a small community center downtown. After-school programs, tutoring, that kind of thing." I nodded slightly, encouraging her to continue. "He came in one afternoon asking about volunteering," she said. "He said he wanted to give back." That's how he put it. A familiar phrase. Michael had used it often. I thought he was just another professional trying to do something good with his time. She continued. "He was polite, a little reserved, but he showed up every week, helped the kids with homework, fixed things around the building, whatever we needed. That sounded exactly like him. Dependable, consistent, quietly generous." "I didn't think much of it at first," Rachel said, "but over time, we started talking more about work, about life. He told me he had been married once, but it didn't work out, that it ended years ago." The words landed heavily. A clean lie, simple, effective, and you believed him. I said, not as a question. She gave a small, sad smile. "Yes." Why wouldn't I? I didn't answer because I knew why. Because I had believed him too. Just about different things. It didn't happen all at once, she added. Our relationship, I mean. It was slow, careful. He always seemed hesitant. Hesitant, I echoed. Rachel nodded, like he was holding something back. Even when things got serious, there was always this part of him that felt distant. I thought it was just his past, whatever had happened in his marriage. I looked down at my coffee, my reflection faintly visible in the dark surface. His past. That was me, or at least the version of me he had created for her. When did you find out about Ethan? I asked quietly. Rachel's gaze shifted toward her son. A little over 7 years ago, she said. I wasn't planning it. It just happened. Her voice softened. When I told Michael, he didn't panic, he didn't run, he just got very quiet. That sounded right. Michael had never been a man of dramatic reactions. He said he needed time to think, she continued. A few days later, he came back and told me he wanted to be part of the baby's life, fully. I felt a tightening in my chest, fully, a word that now felt like a lie in itself. He promised he would take care of us, she said, and he did. Financially, emotionally, he was there. Maybe not every day, but consistently. I let out a slow breath. So he split himself in half, I murmured. Rachel looked at me, confusion flickering across her face. What he had, 2 lives, I said. 2 homes, 2 versions of himself. And somehow, he made both of them believe they were the only one. The reality of it felt almost impossible. And yet here we were, proof sitting right in front of me. Rachel didn't argue. She didn't defend him. She just nodded slowly as if she had already come to the same conclusion. I don't know how he did it, she admitted. There were times he would disappear for days, sometimes longer. He always said it was work. Or family obligations he couldn't explain. Family obligations. Again. The phrase echoed like a cruel joke. That was me, I said quietly. I was the obligation. Rachel's eyes softened. I didn't know she said again, her voice filled with quiet sincerity. I know I replied, and I did. That was the part that made this so complicated, so unfair. If she had known, if she had chosen to be part of this, it would have been easier to direct my anger somewhere. But she hadn't. She'd been lied to just as thoroughly as I had. Maybe even more, because at least I had a history with Michael. Decades of shared life memories. Something real. Rachel had built her entire world on a foundation that didn't exist. Did he ever? I hesitated, unsure how to phrase it. Did he ever seem like he was carrying something, guilt maybe? Rachel was quiet for a moment, then she nodded. Yes, she said. Especially in the last year. My heart skipped. The last year he changed, she explained. Started coming by more often, spending longer stretches here. But at the same time, he seemed distracted, like his mind was somewhere else. I felt a chill run through me. That matched what I had seen. He would watch Ethan play. She continued, her voice soft, and sometimes he'd just get this look on his face, like he was memorizing everything. Memorizing. The word hit me harder than anything else, because I had seen that look too, in my kitchen, in my living room, in the quiet moments when he thought I wasn't paying attention. He started organizing things, Rachel added. Paperwork accounts, he even talked about and making sure everything was taken care of. I closed my eyes briefly. It was all aligning now. Every small, strange behavior I had dismissed, every moment I had chosen not to question. He knew, I whispered. Rachel didn't ask what I meant. He knew he was going to die, I said, opening my eyes again. That's why he planned all of this. The letter, the lawyer, the address. A heavy silence settled between us. And instead of telling the truth, I continued, my voice tightening. He created this elaborate reveal after he was gone, when neither of us could confront him. Rachel looked down at her hands. I don't think he knew how she said quietly. I let out a bitter breath. That doesn't make it right. No, she agreed. It doesn't. Ethan's voice broke the tension. Mom, look. he said, holding up his creation, a small tower of blocks. Rachel smiled faintly. That's great, sweetheart. He beamed for a moment, then looked at me. Do you want to see? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure, I said softly. He walked over, holding it carefully like it was something important. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Because this child, this innocent, unaware child, wasn't part of the lie. He was the result of it. And maybe also the only honest thing that came from it. I looked at him, really looked this time, at the life Michael had created outside of me, and for the first time, the question in my mind changed again. Not just how could he do this, but what am I supposed to do with the truth now that I have it? I didn't expect to see Claire Bennett again so soon, but somehow, part of me knew I would. It was late afternoon by the time I left Rachel's house. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the quiet street. I sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine, trying to process everything I had just learned. 8 years. A child, a second life. The words felt heavy like stones I couldn't put down. I drove home in silence, my mind replaying every conversation, every detail. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. The house greeted me the same way it had that morning. Still, empty. Unforgiving. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and leaned against it for a moment, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I need answers. I whispered to the quiet room, and as if the universe had been waiting for those exact words. There was a knock at the door. Sharp. Precise. I froze. For a second I considered ignoring it, pretending I wasn't home, pretending I didn't have the strength to face anything else today. But something inside me, something stubborn and unrelenting, pushed me forward. I straightened, walked back to the door, and opened it. Claire Bennett stood on the porch. Exactly as I remembered her. Calm, composed, dressed in a tailored navy coat, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. You found the address, she said, not as a question. I stared at her, a mixture of anger and disbelief rising in my chest. You knew, I said. You knew what I would find there. Yes, she replied simply. The ease of her answer made something inside me snap. You sent me there anyway. I continued, my voice sharper now, without warning, without any explanation. Her gaze didn't waver. Michael wanted you to see it for yourself, she said. Michael is dead, I shot back, and I'm the one who has to live with what he left behind. For the first time, something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not quite, but something close to understanding. I know this is difficult, she said. You don't know anything about what this is, I interrupted. A brief silence stretched between us. Then, without asking, she stepped inside. The audacity of it caught me off guard. I closed the door slowly, my eyes never leaving her. Claire moved into the living room as if she had been there before, setting her bag down carefully on the coffee table. Sit, Jean, she said gently. I'd rather stand. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. All right. The room felt tense, charged with everything I wanted to say but didn't know how to put into words. So start talking, I said, now. Claire reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Thick, organized, deliberate. Michael retained me 3 years ago, she began. 3. I repeated, disbelief lacing my voice. Yes, around the time he was first diagnosed. My breath caught. Diagnosed with what? A rare cardiac condition, she said. Progressive, unpredictable. His doctors gave him an estimate, but there were no guarantees. I felt a wave of cold wash over me. He had known for years, and he didn't tell me, I whispered. Claire's voice softened slightly. He said he didn't want you to live under the shadow of it. That wasn't his decision to make, I snapped. No, she agreed. But it was the one he made. I turned away, running a hand through my hair as frustration and grief tangled together inside me. Why you? I asked after a moment. Why involve a lawyer in something like this? Claire placed the folder on the table. Because what he left behind required structure, she said. Legal structure. I looked back at her. What does that mean? It means, she said carefully, that Michael didn't just leave a confession. He left a plan. The word made my stomach tighten. A plan, I repeated. Of course he did. Claire opened the folder, revealing neatly arranged documents. His estate is significant, she continued. Properties, investments, accounts, enough to impact multiple lives. I don't care about the money, I said quickly. This isn't about what you care about, she replied. It's about what he set in motion. I folded my arms, bracing myself. Go on. Claire took a breath. In his will, Michael outlined specific conditions under which his assets would be distributed. I let out a humorless laugh. Let me guess. It's complicated. It's intentional, she corrected. Something in her tone made me go still. Intentional how she met my gaze directly. The estate will only be released if you and Rachel Carter agree to co-manage it. The words didn't fully register at first. Co-manage, I repeated slowly. Yes. With her, yes. I shook my head, a disbelieving smile tugging at my lips. You can't be serious. I am. And if we don't, I asked, my voice tightening. Claire didn't hesitate. Then the entirety of the estate will be liquidated and donated to a set of charitable organizations Michael selected. The room seemed to tilt. You're telling me, I said slowly, each word deliberate, that my husband lied to me for years, had a child with another woman, and now, even after he's dead, he's forcing me to work with her. Claire didn't flinch. He believed it was the only way to ensure both of you and Ethan were taken care of. Taken care of, I repeated, anger rising again. This isn't care. This is manipulation. A quiet silence followed. Then Claire spoke, her voice lower now. He knew you would see it that way. Good, I said, because that's exactly what it is. She nodded slightly. But he also believed that in time you would understand why. I let out a sharp breath. Understand, I echoed. There is nothing to understand. He betrayed me. He lied to her. And now he's controlling both of our lives from beyond the grave. Claire didn't argue. Instead, she closed the folder and slid it slightly toward me. You don't have to decide anything today, she said, but you do need to be aware of your options. I stared at the folder, at everything it represented. This isn't a choice, I said quietly. It's a trap. Or Claire said carefully, it's an opportunity. I looked up at her, disbelief etched across my face. For what I demanded, for truth, she replied. I laughed again, but there was no humor in it. I've had enough truth for one day. Claire picked up her bag. Then take some time, she said. Don't take too long. The terms of the will have a timeline. Of course they do, I muttered. She paused at the door, then turned back to me. One more thing, she added. I waited. There's another letter, she said. One you haven't seen yet. My heart skipped. Another letter. Yes, from Michael. She nodded. But this one, she said, isn't for you. A chill ran down my spine. Then who is it for? Claire held my gaze. Ethan. The room fell silent. And just like that, I realized this wasn't over. Not even close. Ived, my husband, was a man who valued honesty above all else. Now I was sitting in the aftermath of something carefully constructed, something deliberate. I reached out and placed my hand on the folder. Then I pulled it closer. Inside were several neatly organized documents, each labeled and tabbed. Typical Michael. Even now, everything precise, everything in order. My chest tightened. I flipped open the first section. Medical records. The words seemed to blur for a moment before I forced myself to focus. Dates, doctor names, test results, and then there it was. Diagnosis, advanced cardiomyopathy. My breath caught. I didn't need to understand every medical detail to grasp the meaning. The notes were clear enough. Progressive deterioration, limited treatment options, high risk of sudden cardiac failure. I swallowed hard. He had known, not just suspected, known. For years. My fingers traced the date at the top of the page, 3 years ago, the same time he hired Claire, the same time things started to change. I leaned back against the couch, my heart pounding unevenly. You should have told me, I whispered into the empty room, but he hadn't. Instead, he had carried it alone, or maybe not entirely alone. A thought surfaced, unwelcome but impossible to ignore. Rachel. Had she known? I flipped through the rest of the medical documents, searching for any clue, any indication that he had shared this part of his life with her. There was nothing. No mention of her, no notes. No secondary contact, just me, listed as his spouse, his emergency contact, the person who should have known everything, but didn't. I let out a shaky breath and moved to the next section. Financial statements, detailed, extensive, accounts I recognized and others I didn't. Some were joint accounts we had shared for years, savings, investments, retirement funds, but there were others. Separate accounts, carefully maintained, regular transfers. My stomach tightened as I followed the trail. Money moving from one place to another, quietly, consistently, supporting a second life. It wasn't reckless, it wasn't sloppy, it was controlled, managed, planned. I closed my eyes briefly, trying to steady myself. This wasn't just a secret, it was a system, a life he had built piece by piece, ensuring that neither side would collapse into the other. Until now. I moved to the final section, the will. I had expected it to be complicated, but seeing it laid out in legal language made it feel even more real, more final. I skimmed the first few pages, my eyes catching familiar phrases: asset distribution, executor responsibilities, tax provisions. Then I found the clause Claire had mentioned. My name, Rachel's name, side by side. I froze. The wording was precise, cold. If Jean Brooks and Rachel Carter agree to jointly administer and oversee the estate assets for the benefit of all named parties, the estate shall be distributed accordingly. If either party declines, fails to cooperate, or is unable to fulfill this role, the entirety of the estate shall be liquidated and donated. I stopped reading. I couldn't. Not yet. I let the paper fall back into the folder, my hands trembling again. He trapped us, I whispered. But even as I said it, something didn't sit right. Michael had never been cruel. Flawed, yes. Deceptive, clearly. But cruel. The man I had known. The man I had loved. He didn't set traps. So what was this? I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees, trying to make sense of it. He believed it was the only way. Claire's words echoed in my mind. The only way. To do what to force us together, to ensure we couldn't ignore each other. Or something else. My gaze drifted back to the medical records, to the diagnosis, to the timeline. 3 years. He'd known for 3 years that his life could end at any moment. 3 years to think, to plan, to decide how he wanted to leave things behind. And instead of choosing honesty, he chose control. Or maybe he didn't know how to choose anything else. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to push through the confusion. Because beneath the anger, beneath the betrayal, there was something else. Something I didn't want to admit. Understanding, not acceptance, not forgiveness, but understanding. He had been afraid. Afraid of losing me. Afraid of losing Rachel. Afraid of destroying both lives at once. So he had done the only thing he thought he could. He delayed the truth until it couldn't hurt him anymore. A bitter thought formed. No, I said aloud. It still hurts you, just not the way it hurts us. I sat there in silence for a while, letting the weight of everything settle. Then my mind returned to something Claire had said. There's another letter. Not for you, Ethan. The name alone shifted something in my chest. A child who had lost his father. A child who would one day read words written by a man I no longer fully understood. What had Michael said to him? What truth had he chosen to share there? And what had he chosen to hide? I stood up slowly, pacing the room. This is too much, I muttered. Too many questions, too many layers, too many pieces that didn't fit together yet. I stopped in front of the window, looking out at the quiet street. Everything looked the same, unchanged. But nothing was. Because now I had a choice. Ignore it all. Walk away. Let the estate be donated. Let Rachel and Ethan disappear from my life as quickly as they had entered it. Or step into this, into the mess, into the truth, and try to make sense of something that might never fully make sense. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired, older than I remembered, but still standing. "What would you have done, Jean?" I whispered to myself. The answer didn't come immediately, but slowly. Something settled, not clarity, not peace, but direction, because no matter how much I wanted to run, I couldn't unknow what I had learned, and I couldn't ignore the fact that a child was now part of this story, a child who had done nothing wrong. I turned away from the window, my gaze falling back to the folder, to Michael's carefully constructed plan. "You wanted me to understand," I said quietly. "Fine." My voice steadied. "I'll understand, but I won't do it your way." I picked up the folder, closing it firmly, because whatever came next, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about me and the choices I was going to make, now that the truth was finally in front of me. The formal reading of the will took place 3 days later. Claire arranged it. Of course she did. By then I had read every page in that folder more times than I cared to admit. The words hadn't changed, but my reaction to them had shifting from shock to anger, from anger to something heavier and more complicated. Still, nothing prepared me for hearing it out loud. Claire's office was exactly what I expected. Clean lines, muted colors, everything in its place. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in a soft gray light that made the room feel both open and strangely detached. Rachel sat across from me at the long conference table. We hadn't spoken much since my visit to her house. A few brief messages to confirm the time. Nothing more. Now sitting there together, the distance between us felt both physical and emotional. Ethan wasn't there. I was grateful for that. Some things a child shouldn't have to witness. Claire stood at the head of the table, a file open in front of her. Another attorney, a witness, I assumed, sat quietly in the corner, observing. "Thank you both for coming." Claire began, her tone professional but not cold. Neither of us responded. She didn't wait for acknowledgement. "As you are aware, this is the formal reading of the last will and testament of Michael Brooks," she continued. "The document has already been reviewed individually, but today we will go through the relevant sections together to ensure clarity." Clarity. The word felt ironic. I folded my hands in front of me, forcing myself to stay still. Claire began reading. Standard language at first, identification, legal confirmations, statements of sound, mind, and intent. I barely listened. My focus was on Rachel. She sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her posture rigid. Her eyes remained fixed on the table in front of her as if looking up might make everything more real. I wondered what she was thinking. If her thoughts mirrored mine, if she felt as trapped as I did. Claire turned a page. The decedent's estate consists of multiple assets, including but not limited to residential properties, investment portfolios, liquid accounts, and business holdings. Numbers followed, large ones, numbers that under any other circumstances might have been overwhelming. Now they felt almost meaningless. Money couldn't fix this. It couldn't undo what had been done. It couldn't make any of this simpler. The total estimated value of the estate at the time of filing is approximately. I tuned it out. Instead, my mind drifted back to the night Michael had sat beside me on the couch, holding my hand a little longer than usual. If anything ever happens, he had known. And instead of giving me the truth, he had given me this, a legal maze, a forced connection, a decision neither of us had asked to make. Claire's voice shifted slightly, signaling we were approaching the part that mattered. The following clause outlines the primary condition under which the estate shall be distributed. My attention snapped back. Rachel's head lifted slightly. The room seemed to tighten. Claire looked at both of us before continuing. In order for the estate of Michael Brooks to be distributed to the named beneficiaries, Jean Brooks and Rachel Carter must jointly agree to administer and oversee said estate in a cooperative capacity. The words landed heavier this time. Hearing them out loud made them feel more binding, more real. Rachel inhaled slowly, her shoulders rising and falling. Claire continued. This includes, but is not limited to, the management of financial assets, the maintenance or sale of properties, and the establishment of a trust for the benefit of Ethan Carter. Ethan. Even here, his presence was central. Even here, Michael had ensured he would not be overlooked. If either party declines participation, Claire went on, or if cooperation cannot be reasonably maintained, the entirety of the estate shall be liquidated and donated to the following organizations. She listed them: charities, foundations, causes Michael had supported over the years. I felt a flicker of something unexpected. Of course, he had chosen charities. Of course, if everything failed, he would make sure the money still went somewhere meaningful. It was almost predictable. Claire closed the document. That concludes the primary terms, she said. Silence filled the room. No one moved. No one spoke. Finally, Rachel broke first. This isn't fair, she said, her voice quiet but strained. I looked at her. For once, I didn't disagree. No, I said. It's not. Claire remained standing, her expression composed. Fairness is not a legal standard, she said carefully. Intent is. I let out a small, humorless laugh. And his intent was to force us into this, I replied. He believed it was the only way to ensure stability for everyone involved, Claire said. By taking away our choice, Rachel asked, her voice rising slightly. You still have a choice, Claire said. I shook my head. No, we don't, I said. Not really. Rachel looked at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. What do you mean? I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. He set it up so that any choice we make has consequences we can't ignore, I explained. If we refuse, everything disappears. If we accept, we're tied together whether we want to be or not. Rachel's gaze dropped again. He knew we wouldn't walk away, she murmured. Exactly, I said, because despite everything, despite the anger, the betrayal, the confusion, neither of us was the kind of person who would willingly let a child lose everything. Claire spoke again. There is no immediate deadline, she said. However, the estate will remain in a holding state for a limited period. If no agreement is reached within that time, the secondary clause will be enacted. How long? I asked. 30 days, she replied. 30 days. To decide whether to step into a situation neither of us had chosen, or to walk away and lose everything Michael had built. I glanced at Rachel. She looked overwhelmed, lost, just as I felt. I need time, she said quietly. You have it, Claire responded. Rachel stood slowly, her movements careful, as if she were afraid the room might shift beneath her. I can't make this decision today, she added. I nodded. Neither can I. For a moment, we just stood there, two women connected by a man who had never truly belonged to either of us. Then Rachel turned and walked toward the door. She paused briefly, her hand on the handle, then looked back at me. I didn't ask for any of this, she said. I know, I replied. Neither did I. She hesitated, then left. The door closed softly behind her. I remained where I was, staring at the empty chair she had occupied. Claire gathered her documents quietly. Take the time you need, she said. I didn't respond, because time wasn't what I needed. What I needed didn't exist anymore. Michael was gone. The truth was here, and the choice he left behind. It wasn't going away. I didn't plan to see Rachel again that soon. After the will reading, I drove home in silence, my mind heavy with everything that had just been said and everything that hadn't. 30 days. That was the timeline now. 30 days to decide whether to bind my life to a woman I had never known, because of a man I no longer understood. I thought I needed distance, space, time to think. But the truth is, some things don't wait for clarity. They demand confrontation. It was late afternoon when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved, but something in my chest told me exactly who it was. I picked up. Hello. There was a brief pause. Then it's Rachel. Her voice was tight, controlled, like she was holding something back. I figured I said quietly. Another pause. I think we need to talk, she said. I let out a slow breath. I was thinking the same thing. We met at a small cafe halfway between our neighborhoods, neutral ground. Public, but quiet enough for a conversation no one else would understand. When I walked in, she was already there, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup she clearly hadn't touched. She looked up as I approached. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I slid into the seat across from her. "Hi," she said. "Hi." The simplicity of the exchange felt strange given everything between us. A waitress came by, asked if I wanted anything. I ordered coffee out of habit, even though I wasn't sure I could drink it. When she left, the silence returned. But this time it didn't last. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rachel began. "Which part?" I asked. "That we don't really have a choice." I nodded slightly. "Because we don't." She looked down at the table, her fingers tracing the edge of her cup. "I keep going over it in my head," she said, "trying to find a way out that doesn't hurt Ethan." There it was, the center of everything. Ethan. "I can't let him lose everything," she continued, her voice breaking slightly, "not after he just lost his father." Something in me softened at that. "I know," I said. She looked up, her eyes searching mine. "Do you?" she asked. "Because from where I'm standing, you could walk away, you could choose not to be part of this." The words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they were partially true. "I could," I admitted, "but I won't." Her expression shifted, surprise maybe, or relief. "Why?" she asked. I hesitated. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because it wasn't just about money or obligation. "I saw him," I said finally. "Ethan." Rachel's eyes softened, and she asked gently. "And he's innocent," I replied. "He didn't choose any of this. He doesn't deserve to pay for it." Rachel swallowed, hard emotion flickering across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I shook my head slightly. "Don't thank me," I said. "This isn't kindness. It's the only thing that feels right." For a moment, something shifted between us. Not forgiveness, not understanding, but something closer to alignment. Then Rachel's expression hardened slightly. "But that doesn't mean this is okay," she added. I let out a short breath. "No," I agreed. "It's not." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "I spent 8 years with him," she said. 8 years believing I knew who he was, that we were building something real. "So did I said quietly. "Just longer." Her eyes flicked to mine. "And now, we're supposed to sit here." She continued, her voice rising slightly, "and act like we can just work together. Like this is some kind of business arrangement?" "No," I said firmly. "We're not pretending anything." "Then what are we doing?" she demanded. The question hung between us, raw, unfiltered. I leaned back slightly, forcing myself to think. "We're deciding what happens next," I said. For who, she asked. For us or for him? The answer came without hesitation. For Ethan. She stared at me for a long moment. Then something in her posture shifted. A release. A recognition. "That's what I thought," she said softly. The waitress returned with my coffee. I barely noticed as she set it down and walked away. "I'm angry," Rachel said after a moment. "So am I. I hate him for this," she added, her voice trembling, "for putting us in this position." I nodded. "I do too," I admitted. The words felt strange, saying it out loud, admitting that the man I had loved for most of my life had done something I couldn't defend. Rachel let out a shaky breath. "But I also—" She hesitated, her voice faltering. "What I asked. I still love him," she finished. The honesty in her voice hit me harder than anything else she had said, because I understood it, completely. "I know," I said softly. Her eyes filled with tears. "And that makes it worse," she whispered. "Yes," I agreed. "It does." We sat in silence for a moment, letting that truth settle between us. Then Rachel wiped her eyes and straightened slightly. "So what do we do?" she asked. I looked down at my untouched coffee, at the reflection staring back at me, a woman I barely recognized anymore. "We figure out how to make this work," I said. She frowned slightly. "Just like that?" "No," I said. "Not just like that. It's going to be messy, difficult, probably uncomfortable for both of us." That's an understatement, she muttered. I almost smiled. Almost. But we don't have to like each other, I continued. We just have to cooperate. Rachel considered that. And if we can't, she asked. I met her gaze. Then everything he built disappears, I said, and Ethan loses more than he already has. She looked away, her jaw tightening. I won't let that happen, she said firmly. Neither will I. Another silence. But this one felt different. Less hostile. More grounded. Rachel exhaled slowly. Okay, she said. Then we try. I nodded. We try. The words felt fragile, uncertain, but they were something, a beginning, not the one either of us would have chosen, but the one we had. Rachel looked at me again, her expression softer now. I still don't trust you, she said. I let out a small breath. That makes two of us. A faint, unexpected smile touched her lips. Good, she said, and for the first time since all of this began. There was a moment, just a brief one, where the tension eased. Not gone, not resolved, but shifted. Because we weren't just two women connected by betrayal anymore. We were two people standing at the same crossroads, trying to figure out how to move forward without falling apart. I didn't expect Ethan to become the center of everything. Not at first. When Rachel and I agreed to try, I thought the hardest part would be logistics, accounts, properties, legal decisions, the kind of structured impersonal tasks that, while difficult, could be managed with enough distance. I was wrong, because none of this was impersonal, and nothing about Ethan allowed for distance. A week after our conversation at the cafe, I found myself back at Rachel's house. This time, I didn't hesitate at the door. I knocked, and when it opened, Ethan stood there again. His face lit up with recognition. You came back, he said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. I forced a small smile. Yeah, I replied. I guess I did. He stepped aside immediately. Mom, she's here. He called out. Rachel appeared a moment later, wiping her hands on a dish towel. She looked surprised, but not uncomfortable. Hi, she said. Hi. There was still tension between us, but it had softened slightly. Less sharp, less defensive. Come in, she added. I stepped inside. The house felt different this time. Not because it had changed, but because I had. I wasn't just seeing it as evidence of Michael's betrayal anymore. I was seeing it for what it was, a home, Ethan's home. Rachel led me into the living room, but before we could sit down, Ethan tugged lightly at my sleeve. Do you want to see something, he asked. Rachel started to say something, probably to stop him, but I shook my head gently. It's okay, I said. Then I looked down at him. Sure, I added. What is it? His face brightened. Come on. He grabbed my hand without hesitation and led me down the hallway. The contact startled me at first. His hand was small, warm, trusting. I followed him into his room. It was exactly what you'd expect from a boy his age. Posters on the wall, toys scattered across the floor, a small desk in the corner with crayons and papers neatly stacked. But what caught my attention immediately was the shelf. Photos, more of them, Michael. Ethan ran over and picked one up. This is my dad, he said, proudly holding it out to me. I took the frame slowly. It was a picture of Michael sitting on the floor, Ethan on his lap, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. I had never seen that moment. I had never known it existed. He came to my school play, Ethan continued. He sat in the front row. My chest tightened, because I remembered that night. Michael had told me he had a late meeting. I swallowed hard, handing the photo back. That's nice, I managed. Ethan placed it carefully back on the shelf, then turned to me again. I have something else, he said, lowering his voice slightly like it was a secret. I glanced toward the doorway, half expecting Rachel to step in, but she didn't. What is it? I asked. Ethan walked over to his desk and opened the top drawer. He reached inside and pulled out an envelope. My heart skipped, even before he said anything. He told me to give this to you, Ethan said. The room seemed to go still. When I asked quietly, before he went to the hospital, Ethan replied. He said if anything happened, I should wait until you came. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for it. The envelope looked similar to the one I had received. Same paper, same handwriting. Jean, my name again. Written the same way, simple, personal. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stared at it, my mind racing. Another letter. Claire had told me about this, but knowing it existed and holding it in my hands were two very different things. "Do you want me to open it?" Ethan asked. His voice was soft, careful. I shook my head quickly. "No," I said. "No, I'll do it." He nodded, stepping back. I sat down slowly on the edge of his bed, the envelope resting in my hands. This one felt heavier, not physically, but emotionally. Because this wasn't just something Michael had left behind. This was something he had trusted Ethan with. Something he had planned. Again. I took a breath and opened it. Inside was a folded letter. I unfolded it carefully, my eyes scanning the first line. "Jean, if you're reading this, then Ethan has found the courage I didn't have." My throat tightened. I blinked, forcing myself to keep going. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know that. What I did, what I allowed to happen, hurt you in ways I can't undo. But there are things you need to understand. Not to excuse me, but to see the full truth." I paused, my grip tightening on the paper. The full truth. Again. Always more. Always deeper. I continued reading. "Ethan is innocent in all of this. He didn't ask to be part of a life built on secrets, but he is the best thing that came from my worst mistake." I glanced up at Ethan. He was watching me quietly, his expression unreadable. I looked back down. And Rachel. She didn't know. I told her a version of my life that made it easier for me to live with myself. That doesn't make it right. Nothing about this is right. But I need you to know something else. My heart began to race. Something else. The letter continued. The reason I couldn't walk away wasn't just guilt. It wasn't weakness. It was something I never told either of you. Something that started long before Rachel. Long before Ethan. Long before the life you and I built together. I felt a chill run through me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. There was more. There had always been more. My eyes moved quickly to the next line, and for the first time since this all began, I felt something shift. Not anger, not grief, but something else entirely. Because whatever Michael was about to reveal, it was going to change everything I thought I understood. Again. I lowered the letter slightly, my hands trembling. Ethan was still watching me. "Is it bad?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, at his small, hopeful face, at the life that had been built from secrets, but was still undeniably real. "No," I said softly. "Not bad, just not simple." I folded the letter carefully, my mind racing with questions I didn't yet have answers to. And as I sat there in a child's room filled with pieces of a life I had never known, I realized something. The truth wasn't done revealing itself, not even close. I didn't finish the letter in Ethan's room. I couldn't. Not with him standing there watching me, waiting for a reaction I didn't yet understand myself. Not with Rachel just down the hallway, unaware of what was unfolding in the quiet space between her son and the woman who had just entered their lives like a storm. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. "I need a little time to read this," I said gently. Ethan nodded, accepting that without question. "Okay," he replied. "It's yours, yours." The words settled heavily in my chest. Nothing about this felt like it belonged to me anymore. And yet, here I was. "Thank you," I added, my voice soft. He gave a small smile, then turned his attention back to the scattered toys on the floor, as if he had simply completed a task his father had asked of him. I stood slowly, holding the envelope tightly in my hand, and stepped out into the hallway. Rachel was in the kitchen, her back turned, rinsing something in the sink. She glanced over her shoulder as I approached. "Everything okay?" she asked. I hesitated. "No," I said honestly, "but I think it's about to make more sense." Her brows furrowed slightly. "What do you mean?" I held up the envelope. "He left another letter," I explained. "For me, through Ethan." Rachel's expression shifted surprise, then something more complicated. "Of course he did," she murmured. There was no bitterness in her tone, just exhaustion. "I need to read it," I said. She nodded. "Do you want to alone?" I finished. "Yeah," she said quietly. "I understand." I stepped outside onto the small back porch, closing the door gently behind me. The air was cooler now, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the yard. It was quiet, peaceful, in a way that felt almost ironic given everything that was happening. I sat down on one of the wooden chairs and stared at the envelope in my hands. This was it. Another layer, another truth. I took a deep breath and opened it again. The paper unfolded more easily this time. My eyes found the place where I had left off. The reason I couldn't walk away wasn't just guilt. It wasn't weakness. It was something I never told either of you, something that started long before Rachel, long before Ethan, long before the life you and I built together. My pulse quickened. I read on. There was a time before I met you when I made a choice that changed everything. A choice I thought I could leave behind, a mistake I believed would never follow me into the life we created. But it did. It followed me quietly, patiently. Waiting for the moment I could no longer ignore it. I frowned slightly, trying to piece together what he meant. This wasn't about Rachel. This wasn't about Ethan. This was something older, something deeper. Years ago, I was involved in an accident. The words seemed to echo in the still air around me. An accident. I leaned forward slightly, my grip tightening on the paper. I was driving home late one night after a client meeting. I was tired, distracted. I wasn't paying attention the way I should have been, and in a single moment, everything changed. A cold weight settled in my chest. I didn't need the details to know what kind of accident this was. I kept reading. I hit someone. My breath caught. The sentence was simple, blunt, unavoidable. A young woman, she survived. But her life was never the same. I closed my eyes for a second, the image forming in my mind despite my resistance. Michael, behind the wheel, a moment of distraction, and then impact. When I opened my eyes again, the words blurred briefly before I forced myself to focus. I stayed. I called for help. I did everything I could in that moment, but it didn't change what I had done. The guilt followed me. Every day, every night. I carried it into our marriage, into our life together. I told myself I had paid the price, that I had faced the consequences. But the truth is, I never stopped owing a debt I couldn't fully repay. My heart was pounding now, because I could feel where this was going, even before he said it. Years later, I saw her again. Rachel. The name seemed to jump off the page. I froze. Everything inside me went still. Rachel. The woman in the kitchen. The woman whose house I had just walked through. The woman I had thought was simply part of Michael's second life. She was working at the community center when I walked in. She didn't recognize me, or if she did, she didn't say it. But I recognized her, and in that moment I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to face before. My breath came faster now, the realization hitting me piece by piece. Rachel wasn't just someone he met. She wasn't just a relationship that developed over time. She was the woman I had hurt. The paper trembled in my hands. Everything shifted, everything rearranged itself into a new, more devastating shape. I kept reading, my eyes racing. I told myself I was there to help, to give back, to do something good. But the truth is, I was there because I couldn't stay away. Because seeing her living her life despite what I had done was the only way I knew how to breathe again. I never planned for it to become what it did. I never planned for feelings, for connection, for a child. But life doesn't follow plans. And before I understood what was happening, I had created something new. From something that should have ended with regret. Tears blurred my vision now, not just from the betrayal, but from the weight of it, the complexity, the impossible mess of it all. I thought I could separate my past from my present. But I was wrong. I was living in both at the same time, and in doing so, I hurt you. I hurt her. I hurt everyone. I reached the final lines, my heart heavy. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to understand that Rachel was never just a mistake. She was part of a debt I could never fully repay. And Ethan, he is not a symbol of my failure. He is the only thing that ever felt like redemption. I stared at the page, unable to move. The truth settled over me slowly. He hadn't just betrayed me. He had been trying to fix something broken long before I ever entered his life, and in doing so, he had broken something else. I lowered the letter into my lap, my hands numb. Behind me, I could hear the faint sound of movement inside the house. Rachel. Ethan. A life built on something I had never imagined. And now I knew. The real truth. The one that changed everything. Rachel wasn't just the other woman. She was the past Michael had tried and failed to escape. And I was the life he built in between. I sat on Rachel's back porch long after I finished the letter. The sun had dipped lower, casting a warm orange glow across the yard, but I barely noticed. The world felt distant, muted, like everything outside my thoughts had been pushed to the background. Rachel. The name echoed in my mind over and over again, not just as the woman sitting inside that house, but as the girl Michael had hit, the one whose life he had changed in a single moment, the one he had carried with him quietly, secretly for years, and then somehow found again. I pressed the letter flat against my knees, trying to steady my breathing. Nothing about this was simple anymore. Not the betrayal, not the anger, not even the truth. Because now the story had shifted. This wasn't just about a man who had lived two lives. It was about a man who had been running from one life and trying to make peace with it in another. And in the middle of it all, there was me. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, and turned toward the door. I couldn't sit out there any longer. I needed to face her. Rachel was standing in the kitchen when I walked back in. She turned as soon as she heard the door open, her expression searching mine for answers. "You read it," she said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. Yes. Something in my voice must have shifted because her posture changed immediately, tense alert. "What is it?" she asked. "What did he say?" I stepped closer, the letter still in my hand. For a moment I didn't know how to begin. How do you tell someone that their entire relationship, their entire connection to a person, started with something like that? "Rachel," I said carefully, "I need you to listen to me." Her brows furrowed. "Okay." I took a breath. "He told me how you met." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "I already told you that," she said, "the community center." "No," I interrupted gently. "Before that." The room seemed to still. Rachel's expression shifted confusion, giving way to uncertainty. "What do you mean?" she asked. I swallowed hard. "He knew you before that," I said, "years before." She shook her head slightly. "That's not possible," she replied. "I would remember." My grip tightened on the letter. "He said there was an accident," I continued, "a long time ago." Rachel went completely still. The color drained from her face. An accident. The word hung in the air between us, heavy and fragile at the same time. She began, then stopped. Her eyes darted away like she was trying to catch something just out of reach. "There were a lot of years back then," she said slowly. "A lot of things happened." I stepped closer. "He hit you," I said quietly. The words landed with a force I felt in my own chest. Rachel's breath caught. Her hand instinctively moved to the edge of the counter, gripping it tightly. For a moment, she didn't say anything. "Then how do you know that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I held up the letter. "He told me." Her eyes fixed on it, then back to me. "No," she said, shaking her head again. "No, that can't be right, Rachel." I would remember that, she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "You don't just forget something like that." "I know," I said softly, "but he said you didn't recognize him when you saw him again." She stared at me, her breathing uneven now. "That doesn't make any sense," she said. "I was in an accident, yes, but it was years ago. I was young. I was crossing the street," and her voice faltered. Her eyes widened slightly. Fragments, pieces, something beginning to connect. "I never saw the driver," she whispered. "He left before the police got there." Or, that's what I was told. A chill ran through me. The story didn't match, not exactly. "He said he stayed," I said carefully, "that he called for help." Rachel's gaze snapped to mine. "No," she said again, more firmly this time. That's not what happened. The tension in the room thickened. Two versions of the same moment, two truths that didn't align. Maybe he believed that's what he did, I offered. Or maybe that's how he needed to remember it. Rachel's hands trembled slightly as she pushed herself away from the counter. So, what she demanded? What are you saying, that my entire life with him was built on… What guilt obligation, I don't know, I admitted. But he said you were part of something he couldn't walk away from, that being near you was the only way he could live with what he did. Her expression twisted hurt, anger, disbelief, all colliding at once. That's not love, she said sharply. I know. Then what was it, she pressed. I hesitated, because I didn't have an answer that would make any of this better. Maybe it started as guilt, I said slowly, but it didn't stay that way. Rachel let out a bitter laugh. You don't get to tell me what it was she said. You weren't there. And you weren't there either, I replied more firmly than I intended. Not at the beginning. The words hung between us. Sharp, uncomfortable, true. Rachel looked away, her jaw tightening. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then quietly, he loved Ethan, she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. A need. Yes, I said, he did. And me, she asked, her voice softer now. Did he love me? I held her gaze. I think he did, I answered honestly. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. And you? She asked. Did he love you? The question hit me differently, deeper, because now I didn't know how to answer it the way I once would have. Yes, I said after a moment, but not in the way I thought. Rachel nodded slowly as if she understood exactly what I meant. We stood there, two women connected by a man who had tried and failed to be everything to both of us. And now we were left to make sense of what remained. So what do we do with this? She asked quietly. I looked down at the letter in my hand, at the truth it carried, at the weight of it. We don't ignore it, I said, and we don't let it define everything either. Rachel frowned slightly. That sounds nice, she said, but it doesn't change what happened. No, I agreed, it doesn't. I stepped closer, my voice steady now, but it changes how we move forward. She studied me for a long moment, trying to understand, trying to decide whether to believe me. Michael made choices, I continued, bad ones, complicated ones, but he also left something behind that isn't just about him. Her eyes softened slightly. Ethan, she said. Yes. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt different. Less like a battlefield, more like a crossroads, because now we knew, not just the surface truth, but the deeper one. The one that didn't excuse anything but explained everything. And somehow, that made the choice ahead both harder and clearer. I didn't sleep that night either, not because of fear this time, not because of shock, but because of clarity. It came slowly, quietly, like something settling into place after being shaken for too long. Every piece of the story, every layer of truth, every contradiction, it all circled in my mind until it finally stopped fighting itself. And when it did, I knew what I had to do. The next morning I called Claire. She answered on the second ring. Jean. Her voice was calm as always. I've made a decision, I said. There was a brief pause. I thought you might have, she replied. Can you meet today, I asked. Yes, she said. My office. Noon I'll be there. I hung up without another word. Then I picked up my keys, because there was one more person I needed to see before any of this could move forward. Rachel opened the door before I even knocked, like she had been waiting. Her eyes searched mine, immediately looking for something. An answer, maybe. I was about to call you, she said. I know, I replied. Can I come in? She stepped aside. The house felt quieter than usual. Ethan wasn't in the living room. He's at school, Rachel said, as if reading my thoughts. I nodded. Good. She crossed her arms, leaning slightly against the wall. So she asked, what happens now? No hesitation, no small talk, just the question that had been waiting for both of us. I took a breath. I'm going to accept the terms of the will, I said. Her expression didn't change at first. Then a flicker, surprise, relief, and something else. "You're sure?" she asked. "Yes. Even after everything you know now," I held her gaze, especially because of it. She studied me for a moment, trying to understand. Why, she asked. The question wasn't defensive, it was honest, and it deserved an honest answer. Because walking away doesn't fix anything, I said. It doesn't undo what he did. It doesn't make the truth any less real. Rachel nodded slowly, and staying, she pressed. "Working together, that fixes it." "No," I said. "It doesn't fix it either." She frowned slightly. "Then what does it do?" I stepped further into the room, my voice steady. "It gives us a chance to decide what comes next," I said, "on our terms, not his." The words seemed to land. Rachel uncrossed her arms, her posture shifting. "And you think we can do that?" she asked. "I think we have to try." She let out a quiet breath. "Because of Ethan." "Yes," I said. "Because of Ethan." The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was thoughtful, measured. Rachel walked slowly into the living room, gesturing for me to sit. I did. She remained standing for a moment, then finally sat across from me. "I've been thinking too," she admitted. About everything she said, the accident, the lies, the way it all connects. I nodded. "It's a lot." "That's one way to put it," she said, a faint edge of dry humor in her voice. For a brief moment, something almost like normal conversation passed between us. Then it faded. "Part of me wants to hate him," she said quietly. "I know. And part of me already does." I didn't respond, because I felt it too. That split, that contradiction. But then I look at Ethan. She continued, her voice softening, and I see how much he loved him, how much he still does. I leaned back slightly. "And that makes it harder," I said. "Yes." She looked at me again. "And you?" she asked. "Where are you with all of this?" I took a moment before answering. "Somewhere in between," I said. "I don't hate him, but I don't forgive him either." Rachel nodded slowly. "That makes sense." We sat in silence for a moment. Then she spoke again. "If we do this," she said, "we need to be clear about something." I straightened slightly. "What?" "This isn't going to be easy," she said. "There are going to be disagreements. Tension, maybe worse. I know. And we don't pretend to be something we're not," she added. "We're not family." "Not really." I considered that, then shook my head gently. "No," I said. "Not the kind we expected." Her eyes narrowed, slightly curious. "What does that mean?" I met her gaze. "It means we don't have to define it yet," I said. "We just have to build something that works." She held my gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said. The word felt simple, but it carried weight. Agreement, acceptance, a beginning. I exhaled quietly. "Then we go see Claire," I said. Rachel stood. Together, I nodded. "Yes, together." Claire didn't look surprised when we walked into her office side by side. If anything, she looked prepared. "I take it you've reached a decision," she said. I stepped forward. "We have," I replied. Rachel stood beside me, her posture steady. Claire glanced between us, and I didn't hesitate. "We'll accept the terms," I said. "We'll co-manage the estate." A brief pause. Then Claire nodded. "I'll begin the necessary arrangements," she said. Just like that, it was done. Or at least, it had begun. Because this wasn't an ending. It wasn't closure. It was a choice. One that would shape everything that came next. As we turned to leave, Claire spoke again. "You should know," she said, "this won't be simple." I glanced back at her. I never expected it to be. She gave a small, knowing nod. "Good." Rachel and I walked out of the office together. The air outside felt different. Lighter somehow. Not because things were resolved, but because we had finally stopped standing still. We reached the parking lot, paused, looked at each other. "This is really happening," Rachel said. "Yes," I replied. She let out a slow breath. "Okay," I nodded. "Okay." And for the first time since all of this began, the future didn't feel like something to fear. It felt like something we were choosing, together. The first few weeks were the hardest. Not because of the paperwork, not because of the estate, but because of the silence that still existed between us. Rachel and I met often, sometimes at Claire's office, sometimes at her house, sometimes at mine. We reviewed documents, discussed assets, made decisions that felt too big for two people who barely knew each other. At first, everything was formal, careful, measured. We spoke in short sentences, stuck to facts, avoided anything personal. It was easier that way, safer. But life doesn't stay inside boundaries forever. It started with something small. Ethan had a school event, a simple presentation where parents were invited. Rachel mentioned it casually during one of our meetings. "I might be late," she said. "I have to leave early to get there." I nodded. Of course. There was a pause. Then she added, almost hesitantly, "He asked if you were coming?" The question caught me off guard. "Me," I repeated. Rachel gave a small shrug. "He remembers you, and I think he likes you." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to step back, to keep distance, to remind myself that this wasn't my place. But another part, a quieter, more persistent part, didn't want to. "I don't want to make things complicated," I said. Rachel looked at me. "They already are," she replied gently. I let out a small breath. "That's true." She hesitated, then added, "You don't have to come, but I think it would mean something to him." I thought about that, about Ethan's small hand in mine, about the way he had said, "You came back." And before I could overthink it, "I'll be there," I said. Rachel smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but real. "Okay," she said. The school auditorium was small, filled with parents, teachers, the quiet hum of children trying to sit still. I sat a few rows behind Rachel, not beside her, not yet, but close enough. Ethan stood on stage with his classmates holding a piece of paper that he kept glancing down at nervously. When it was his turn, he stepped forward. "My name is Ethan," he began. His voice was small but steady. "I want to talk about someone important to me." I felt my chest tighten. "My dad," he said. Rachel's shoulders stiffened slightly. I saw her grip the edge of her seat. "He used to help me with my homework," Ethan continued, "and he always said I should try my best." His voice wavered for a moment. "But he's not here anymore." The room grew quieter. "But my mom says that doesn't mean he's gone," he added, "because the things he taught me are still here." He placed a hand over his chest. "And I think people can leave things behind. Not just money, not just stuff, but people." My breath caught, because I knew what he was about to say. "I have my mom," Ethan said, "and now I have someone else too." His eyes scanned the room, then landed on me. "Jean," he said simply. The world seemed to stop. "She's helping us now," he continued, "and I think that my dad would want that." Silence filled the space. Not empty, not awkward, but full, heavy with meaning. Ethan smiled slightly, then stepped back. The applause came a moment later, soft at first, then louder. I didn't move. I couldn't. Because something inside me had shifted in a way I hadn't expected. Not forced, not planned, just happened. After the event, Rachel and I walked out together. Ethan ran ahead, talking excitedly about something neither of us fully heard. We stood by the car watching him. "He meant that," Rachel said quietly. "I know." She looked at me. "Thank you for coming." I shook my head. "You don't have to thank me." "I do," she said, "because you didn't have to be here." I thought about that, about all the choices I could have made, all the ways this story could have ended differently. "You're right," I said. She frowned slightly. "About what?" "I didn't have to be here," I replied. I paused, then added, "But I'm glad I am." Rachel held my gaze. Then slowly, she nodded. Months passed. Not perfectly, not easily, but steadily. Rachel and I learned how to work together, how to disagree without breaking everything, how to build something that didn't rely on the man who had brought us together in the first place. And Ethan became the bridge between us, not as a reminder of the past, but as a reason to move forward. I started spending more time at their house, Not as a visitor, but not quite as family either. Something in between, something new, something we were still defining. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Ethan sat beside me on the porch. "Do you think my dad knew this would happen?" he asked. I looked at him. "What do you mean? That we would all be here," he said. I thought about Michael, about his letters, his plan, his mistakes, his intentions. "I think he hoped," I said finally. Ethan nodded as if that made sense. "I miss him," he added. "I know. Do you?" I smiled softly. "More than I can explain." He leaned slightly against my arm, and for the first time, that didn't feel complicated. It just felt right. Sometimes I still think about that day at the funeral, the moment everything began, the moment a stranger sat beside me and said he sent me. At the time, I thought it was the beginning of something that would destroy me, but now I understand. It wasn't about destruction. It was about truth, about facing what was hidden and choosing what to do with it. Michael didn't leave behind a perfect ending. He left behind a mess, a complicated, painful, imperfect truth. But within that truth, there was something else, a chance to rebuild, to redefine, to heal, not because of him, but in spite of him. And maybe that's what he meant all along. Life has a way of revealing truths we're not ready for. Sometimes those truths hurt more than we think we can bear. They break the image we've built, the people we've trusted, and even the version of ourselves we believed in. But truth also gives us something else, a choice. Jean could have walked away. She could have held on to anger, protected herself, and left everything behind, and honestly, that would have been understandable. But instead, she chose to face the truth, not to forgive immediately, not to forget, but to move forward anyway. Because sometimes healing doesn't come from what was done to us. It comes from what we decide to do next. Rachel wasn't the enemy. Ethan wasn't the mistake. And Michael, he wasn't just a villain or a hero. He was human, flawed, broken, trying to fix something in the worst possible way. So the question isn't whether people make mistakes. They always will. The real question is, what would you do if you were John? Would you walk away, or would you stay and try to build something new from the truth? If this story moved you, share your thoughts below. I'd really love to hear what you think. And if you believe stories like this matter, don't forget to like and subscribe, because sometimes the stories we tell help us understand our own lives a little better.